Okay. Hi, can you guys hear me? I've put some headphones in and hopefully the sound is better. Just let me know if you guys can hear me or not. Perfect, perfect. Okay. Okay, welcome. This is round two. Let's try and see if this works. Hi,
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Can you see me? Can
Yes,
you hear me?
we can see you and hear you.
Great. Thank
Perfect.
you so much for hosting this and the fact that this is your first Instagram Live. I feel very
No,
honored. So thank you
thank you.
so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for giving us your time to come and speak to us about this. Yeah, I was trying to get this sorted for a little bit and I sent like a request to your personal Instagram and I think that's why I was like confused. But here we are.
I know it's all very yeah. I don't know how these Instagram Lives work, but yeah,
Yeah,
we've sorted it out.
perfect. Okay, so for those who are just joining, basically, I'm Achol Arok. I am a student journalist. I'm just about to graduate my journalism degree, and yeah, today we'll be speaking to Santilla about this new documentary coming out on SBS called Our African Roots. And Santilla, if you want to take it away and give us like a little bit of a synopsis about what it's about, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, this is a documentary that we made. So me and my colleagues, Tony Jackson, David Collins, and Kauthar Abdul Alim, we essentially tell the story of people of African descent that have been, erased from Australian history. So from pivotal moments in Australian history, our foundational stories, and we essentially go back, reassess those stories and say that, at these particular moments, there were people of African ancestry that were also there and also contributed, but have been forgotten. And we ask the question, why have they been forgotten? Why have they been erased? And hopefully what comes out of that is not just a reassessment, but obviously a sense of, people embracing these histories, embracing these stories and these ancestors, and that there's just a general awareness that, Australian history is far more diverse than we've been told, certainly from how I was taught in school, and that it does involve people of African ancestry, and that we have contributed so much for a very long time to this country's foundation, well, this colonized country's foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like you said, it's not something that's quite known here. So how did you kind of get the idea to kind of explore this unknown like history?
That's a really good question. It started from, I live in Victoria, I live in Melbourne. So for a number of years, there was this very constant narrative that sort of just kept repeating itself pretty much every summer about so-called African crime. And if it wasn't the so-called Apex gang one summer, it was an African crime wave. And apparently people were terrified to go to restaurants at some point. And a lot of the commentators at the time in the media were essentially saying that this was an Australian rite of passage, that the reason why people of African descent were copying this negative response was because it's just how we did it. The Italians had experienced it, the Vietnamese, the Greeks. So this was the turn for the Africans. And perhaps there might be some truth to that. But I also knew that, the presence of African people was not a recent thing. I'd sort of done a story about an African convict that was transported here in the 1830s in 2015. And I'd also heard about stories about people that were on the First Fleet and, others that had contributed. But what I hadn't seen was actual evidence. And so I started to, I decided to go to the archives and really start looking there and sort of go, how can you verify this? you know, I'm a journalist by trade. And so I sort of thought, if I can verify the existence of these people, at the very least, that essentially dismisses the argument that this is a very recent thing. Um, and when that happened, I went to, you know, Tony Jackson, who's the producer and director on this as well. He's a very good friend of mine. And, you know, I went to him and I said, look, you know, what do you think? Do you reckon we can make a film? He was on board from the get-go, and that's essentially how it happened, you know. So that's how the documentary came about.
That's great. And from the previews, it looks like you guys really got some great stories in there. Speaking of the archives, how hard was it? Do you think the history was well documented? Like, did you find it difficult?
I mean, colonial history is I mean, it's well documented in the sense of, depending on what you're looking for. I mean, reading the archive in itself is a skill, and you need to have a certain literacy. And I was fortunate that I do have that, and I was able to do that, which in itself speaks to the bigger questions around why did it take so long? Why don't we know enough about this? I mean, reading the archive does require a level of literacy.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I sort of think, you know, these stories, I mean, I think the frustration in many ways is that it's taken this long to begin to sort of really start to tell the truth about our foundation as a country. You know, the fact that 2021, that we're beginning to sort of go, hang on that first fleet, there were people of African descent. Like, what? How have we gone for 200 plus years? Completely erasing this fact, you know. And so in many ways, as much as it's exciting to be sharing these stories and these histories, it's also quite frustrating that we're having this conversation in 2021.
Absolutely. I guess as we've seen in the past year and last year with the Black Lives Matter movement, one thing we've kind of really seen is or has come to light is the general lack of knowledge about Indigenous history. And I think the education system is kind of at fault. So how do you think a documentary like this, which can be implemented in the education system, can kind of teach children about a wider history more than just, I guess, the colonial view?
Yeah. I mean, I should start by saying that, you know, our film is not a panacea. It is not a fix-all. It is not the thing that is going to solve every problem, every question, make every person feel seen, heard, validated. Our intention is that it is the beginning of a conversation, you know, that an awareness that these stories exist. I think that's really the intention of this. There's a lot that it cannot do simply because we are starting out with the telling of these histories. I think it would definitely be wonderful to see these stories end up in the curriculum, because they are true, they're fact. It's not, we're not revising anything or anything like that. We are simply going, at every point in Australia's foundational story, people of African descent show up and they've been erased. And we should know the name of these ancestors. We should be talking about them. Kids should be learning about them. I mean, how is it possible that we can tell the story of the Eureka Rebellion and completely omit the fact that there were two people of African descent that were pivotal to the events that happened there, you know?
Absolutely.
Like, how does that happen? And so, you know, our intention is that there's this begins a conversation of raising the awareness of the complexity of Australia's colonized foundation, but also acknowledging that this is just the start. You know, this film will not be able to do a lot of things. And I know that there might potentially be some expectations around that, but I really hope that people receive it for the spirit that in which we intended this film to be received. And why we made it was, we sort of went, we're not talking about this, we need to be talking about it. And hopefully this is the beginning of many, many more stories that unpack these complexities.
Absolutely. And how do you think, in what kind of ways do you think people can draw correlations between the history and the day, like the life we live today? What type of correlations do you think people can draw from this documentary? I know it's a big question.
I was about to say, I'm like, how much time do you have? Because that is a whole PhD in itself. I think, I don't know if the documentary can answer that question, simply because that is not the intention of it in many ways. In many ways, what it is saying is that, like I said, I think the impetus for me was there was this larger narrative that was essentially saying that the reason why African Australians were receiving a lot of negative backlash was
Mm-hmm.
because they were a recently arrived group, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying is that the historical fact is that that's not true. That people of African descent have been here far longer and have contributed to in so many ways to this country's colonized foundation, and
Mm-hmm.
that in itself is also complicated. You know, it's not a completely. I think in the film, um, there's a quote by a Tonga Tem who says it's not an entirely positive story and it's not also an entirely negative story. You know, it's very, very complicated. So you can't look at it in
Mm-hmm.
binaries. But at the same time, it's about how do you begin to then process that? What does it then mean if people that look like me and you have been
Mm-hmm.
here since the arrival of that first fleet of ships, and they have descendants who now identify as white, who are also
Yeah.
Australian? What do all these things mean? I mean, I think what will end up happening is that people will leave with more questions than answers, which is not a bad place to
Mm-hmm.
be. I think it's a good thing to be asking questions. But all that we ask is that if we're going to be engaging in these debates,
Mm-hmm.
let us at least have a foundation of truth and fact. And this is what we're presenting with this documentary. It is fact, it is
Mm-hmm.
truth. We're not trying to reimagine anything, or it's not revisionist history. It's just saying that these people were there, they've just been erased.
Mm-hmm.
Why? But also when it comes to dealing with the challenges that we're faced with today, particularly around newly arrived groups, whether it is African Australians, it doesn't make any sense to say to someone, where do you come from? You know, because if African Australians or people that have African ancestry have been here since at least 1788, then the only people that have the right to say that are First Nations
Yeah.
people. They're the only people that have the right to ask us, to say to us, where are you from? You know, because we have as
Yeah.
much right to be here as well, with all the complexity. So I'm not trying to sort of, you know, downplay the complexity of living within a colonized country.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm saying is that, you know, we have as much entitlement to belong here as much as someone that is British or Irish descent, if that makes any
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I guess I would like an insider's look of what the research process into curating this documentary looked like. Was it completely archives? Was it speaking to people? How hard was it to find people to speak to?
It was a combination, and a lot of it was, again, with, you know, my colleagues that I worked with on this, David Collins and Tony Jackson. It really was not just archival stuff, but we had conversations. I mean, you could make a documentary about the making of this documentary. The robust conversations we had, you know, because there's a responsibility that comes with telling these stories. You know, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
who we're telling these stories, but we also know that we're presenting them at a time when politically there is interest in these sorts of things, and people want to experience something and to feel something. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of things that we had to think through to turn it into the engaging hour of television that you will end up seeing on Sunday.
Yeah. And in with that process, what do you think, or could you speak about some of the challenges you faced?
COVID. Try
Yeah.
making a television documentary in the midst of a global pandemic. I mean, it just
Yeah.
shift the goalposts. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
without getting into too much detail, I mean, the original idea for the film was very different, and that all changed because of the pandemic and what that presented. And then also trying to film something in the midst of changing restrictions. We filmed largely in Victoria and New South Wales, and particularly in
Yeah.
Victoria, there were constant shifts to restrictions, and so that added more challenges, you know, in
Mm-hmm.
what we could tell and how we could tell it. So yeah, I mean, you know, the fact that we even managed to get a film made at the end really surprises me, because yeah, would not wish it on anyone to tell a history documentary about during a global pandemic. It is
Yeah.
it
Did
is
you did you guys ideate this documentary before the pandemic and then have to
Yes.
work through it, or
Yeah.
okay, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
So, like I said, you know, the sorts of plans that we had for it were
Yeah.
very different, and the pandemic meant that we had to shift our gaze and shift our focus. But that doesn't change the core of what we're trying to say and what we think is at the heart of this film fundamentally. But yeah, we had to deal with a lot of production challenges because of a global pandemic, but we still think that we made an engaging film, and hopefully one that does present these histories to people that might not be aware about them for the first time in an informative way. But we also know that it's 100% fact. So because of that, we're very not just pleased, but we feel a great deal of joy, privilege, to be able to tell these stories. I mean, you know, you don't get these opportunities often, not just as a filmmaker, as a journalist, to tell these sorts of stories, to introduce stories for the first time to people. So the fact that we were sitting with this and we knew the responsibility that came with it is a deep honor for everyone that's been involved in this film. So it's, yeah, we're just very excited to share it and to see what people do with these stories, because that's what's going to be very exciting, to see how people embrace these stories and what conversations come out of that.
Absolutely. That makes me so excited to watch it.
You should be
Yeah.
excited.
Yes, it would be. And I hope everyone here watching is excited, just as I am. So yeah, I will answer one of the questions in the comments just because I did choose Instagram Live for the interactive purpose of it. So someone asked, did you find any descendants? And I'm assuming they meant any descendants of the African Australians who came on the first fleet.
Yeah, we did. They're in the film. You get to see them.
Oh wow!
And you get to hear them talk about the processing of you know, having a black ancestor. I don't want to ruin it for you, so I'm not going to get into detail. But yes, we do feature descendants, and you do get to hear from them.
Perfect. No spoilers.
Yeah, no spoilers.
Perfect. Do you feel comfortable speaking a little bit about how you kind of embraced the film and how you felt during the process of discovering these untold stories?
Gosh, like I said, it was one of those things that even now when I reflect back, I sort of go, wow, we were really, really lucky. Like this was, it's such a privilege to sit with these sorts of stories. I think what surprised me was I still cannot wrap my head around that we're having this first sort of exploration into these stories in 2021. I think that's really the thing that still is quite like, whoa, how I mean, we try to answer that question in the film, but that definitely surprised me. But in many ways, I think meeting the descendants is probably one of the most rewarding experiences for me, because you spend a lot of time, particularly with the archive, there's a lot that you can understand and you can unpack and you can make sense of, but it's very different to speak to someone who this is their family history, you know. So for them, it's not so much an intellectual exercise, it's very much a personal experience, and how they process that and how they begin to make sense of it. And in many ways, it left me very, very hopeful. It left me, I'm naturally a skeptic, but meeting the descendants and how they have managed to process these stories and their connection to these ancestors. And when you think about our legacy of the White Australia policy and how racist that was, and to have people come out on the other side of that and sort of go, man, you know, these people were awesome, and I feel proud to have that as part of my heritage. It left me hopeful. It left me hopeful, thinking that as a country, probably there's scope for us to really reckon with these parts of our history, and figure out a way forward. I don't know what the answer is to that, but it definitely left me feeling hopeful in a way that I didn't expect to feel. I think I was already resigned to the fact that, you know, there was no hope, but certainly the descendants were the biggest surprise for me in that regard.
Absolutely. That's a really thoughtful response. Another person asked, what was your favorite part of working on this project?
Every part of it was my favorite part. Yeah, like I said, I mean, every story, you sort of sit there and you sort of go, wow, what a privilege to be able to share this story, and what a privilege to be able to meet the descendants of these men and women. And we got pretty lucky again, because everyone that we collaborated with on this cares so much about these stories. I mean, you know, it's very rare that you work on something that, you know, you love it and everyone else is just as passionate about it, cares about it as much as you do. And I have to say that on this one specifically, across the board, every person that we collaborated with was committed to telling these stories, was passionate about telling these stories. And it was one of those things that you sort of go, these sorts of things don't happen often. And for that, it was a very, very special experience. So I'd have to say the whole process has really been fun, enjoyable, exhilarating, and just a privilege. I know I'm overusing that word, but it really is the truth.
I have no doubt that these kind of emotions are going to be portrayed in the film. And I think I read somewhere that you're making a book. Is it any way related to this?
It is a sort of a deeper analysis of the histories and stuff. It focuses explicitly on convicts, people of African descent, and the bigger global political sort of factors that led to them being transported. And so it's obviously a deeper analysis, because obviously in an hour of television there's only so much you can do. But yeah, the documentary gives a bit of space. So if people want to be nerdy and find out a little bit more about a lot of these people, they can wait until next year to read the book. But yeah, it's an ongoing exploration for me. So the documentary is very much a start.
Definitely. Well, I am a big reader, so I have no doubt that I will be ordering this book. I know you said sometime next year, but someone asked, when will this book be set to be released?
Sometime next year. It's a lot of work writing a history book. So yeah, all I can say is that sometime next year. But I'll come back. We'll do a live. You know what I mean?
Yes.
We can have another one of these. So
perfect. Yeah. Absolutely, I'm down for it. Yeah, and now that we've kind of got the basics of this documentary done, do you want to speak a little bit about you and how, I guess, like what you do and how you came across this role to produce and present this documentary?
Gosh, that's a weird and uncomfortable question. I don't know. You have to be a bit more pointed. What do you want to know?
Basically, what does your resume look like? What do you do? Like your background in journalism, in history, maybe. Yeah, speak a little bit about yourself.
I started my career as a journalist. I started at SBS. I worked in news there for a good 8 years. And I left about 5 years ago to pursue documentary filmmaking because I loved the space that filmmaking gives you to explore ideas and sit with context and complexity in a way that I felt news was very limited. And it's not to say that I think news is important and it's there for a reason. But for me and the things that I wanted to say, I felt like I needed a bit more space. And so that's how I got into documentary filmmaking and filmmaking just generally. And as I mentioned to you earlier, what led me to the archive was just the events around the narrative around, so-called African crime, and how that was a conversation that I felt the discourse was not rooted in fact. But we know that these sorts of narratives can be quite dangerous and can impact a lot of people. And I was hearing first-hand accounts from, parents and people within the African Australian community here in Victoria who were talking about how children were being directly impacted by that sort of rhetoric and language, and the stereotypes that come from that sort of stuff. And so I sort of thought, okay, how you repeat yourself over and over again saying the same thing, that these narratives are racialized, and it felt like it wasn't cutting through. And so I sort of thought, if we're going to be having conversations around identity and belonging and who is Australian and who gets to call this place their home, at the very least, can we talk about that with the facts? And like I said, because I had an awareness of these histories, I sort of thought, okay, if I can go and find them and verify them, and this was the journalist part of me to sort of go, if I could independently verify this, then when we do start having conversations around identity, belonging, who gets to be Australian, then at the very least, we're basing that in fact, you know, not just some sort of absurd idea and notions of identity, which for a long time have been hijacked by a very small but very vocal minority of people. And so that was important. And so that's kind of how that led me to the archive. I mean, a lot that was helped because I got a fellowship from State Library Victoria, which also allowed me to have the time to spend looking through that sort of stuff. But you know, it's been like I said, it's been a really, really wonderful experience. I felt like these ancestors have been with me the 4 years that I've been doing this, which in itself sounds crazy, but it's been just a joy, an honor to be able to not only find their stories in the archive, but be able to, at the very least, honor them in a way that they haven't before. I mean, to go for over 200 years of people not acknowledging your existence, I can't imagine what that would be like. I can't imagine what that would be like for your family, for those that loved you and those that cared about you. And so to be in a very privileged position to be able to be that, you know, conduit through, whether it's through a documentary, through a book, or whatever else, to bring those stories to life and to share these stories about these remarkable people is just incredible.
Absolutely. You speak about this documentary in such a heartwarming way, and I really do hope that a lot of these the people watching now give it the time to watch. And I think I hope at least it does help kind of this new generation of African Australia kind of grapple with the identity issues they've been facing. At least that's what it sounds like. It'll kind of help me with, and I definitely do hope to tune in. I know it's coming to the end of this live, and I really enjoyed speaking to you today, and thank you again for giving us this time. I hope that
it's a pleasure, and you know, let's do it again once it airs. I want to hear what you think about it.
Absolutely.
I want to get off the feels. It would be interesting, because I mean that's why we made it, and again I'm speaking on behalf of the entire team that worked on this. I mean, we were very aware of the responsibility that came with it, but we also, our intention was that for a lot of people that have felt that they have not been part of the larger narrative of this country, that hopefully it gives them a sense of belonging, and to know that this is as much their home as it is the next person, even with all of that complexity. So it's not, again, to downplay the complexity of living in a colonized country, but it's also about saying that, you know, we have as much right to be here as the next person, and that's all we can hope that this film can do. And if it does do that, then I think we'll all be very, very happy. So I really look forward to hearing what you think about it, and if it does do that for you, then, you know, you've not only made my year, but you've made my life. You made my life. So
thank you very much. I'll definitely reach out and let you know what I think. And yeah, I love the excitement coming from the comments, and I do hope people really tune in and pay attention. Yeah, but thank you so much, and I hope we can do this again.
Likewise. Thank you. And next Sunday, 8:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time on SBS. Please tune in. Tell your friends, tell your mama, tell the person down at the North Bar, tell everyone. We made this with the best of intentions, and like I said, it might not be able to do everything for everyone, but I really hope that it's received with the spirit by which it was made, which was to sort of go, we need to start telling the truth about our history, and that's about as good a place to start as any, I think.
Absolutely. This 30 minutes went too fast, but thanks again.
All right, you take care, and thanks everyone that tuned in.
Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.